Good evening. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu just laid out 4 non-negotiable demands that Iran must meet for any nuclear agreement to be acceptable, and these demands are specifically designed to be impossible for Iran's regime to accept, creating the conditions for military strikes that President Donald Trump has already authorized. The 4 demands are: first, all enriched uranium must be shipped out of Iran completely. Second, zero enrichment capability, meaning Iran must dismantle all centrifuges and uranium enrichment equipment permanently. Third, real limits on ballistic missiles that threaten Israeli cities and American forces. And fourth, tearing down what Netanyahu calls Iran's regional axis of terror, meaning complete defunding of Hezbollah, Hamas, Houthis, and Iraqi militias. All 4 simultaneously with verifiable compliance. And Trump told Netanyahu directly that he would support Israeli strikes on Iran's ballistic missile program if negotiations fail to produce Iran's acceptance of these demands. CBS News confirmed Trump's backing, quoting sources saying either Iran accepts the agreement or it seems this will not end well for them. Not end well is diplomatic language for comprehensive military operations destroying Iran's missile arsenals, nuclear facilities, and regime command centers. This is Trump-Netanyahu Masterplan, where impossible demands create diplomatic failure that justifies military action both leaders have already decided is necessary. And the Masterplan is working perfectly because Iran is showing exactly the duplicitous behavior that proves they cannot be trusted. Iran's Foreign Minister Araghchi meets with UN nuclear chief pretending to pursue diplomacy, while simultaneously Iran's Revolutionary Guards conduct military drills in Hormuz Strait, flexing muscles and threatening confrontation. Araghchi vows no submission before threats while claiming Iran is ready to discuss compromises. That's contradictory messaging, revealing regime paralysis between wanting sanctions relief and refusing to surrender capabilities. And U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio confirmed achieving deal will be very hard to do, which is diplomatic preparation for talks failing and military option becoming necessary. The 4 demands are impossible. Trump backs strikes when demands are refused, and Iran's two-faced approach of meeting UN officials while conducting war drills proves they're finished. The master plan guarantees regime elimination, whether through impossible surrender or authorized strikes targeting missiles and regime infrastructure. Netanyahu and Trump coordinated perfectly. Iran is trapped, and missiles are targeted. Let me break down Netanyahu's 4 non-negotiable demands and explain why each one is specifically designed to be unacceptable to Iran's regime while simultaneously being completely reasonable from Israeli and American security perspectives. First demand, all enriched uranium out of Iran. This means every gram of uranium Iran has enriched to any level above natural must be shipped out of the country to international custody. Iran currently has uranium stockpiles enriched to 5%, 20%, and 60% purity. The IAEA assessed Iran's stockpile could yield maybe a dozen nuclear bombs if further enriched to 90% weapons grade. Netanyahu's demand eliminates this breakout capability by physically removing all enriched material from Iranian territory. Iran cannot build bombs without enriched uranium. But this demand is unacceptable to Iran because shipping out uranium means admitting complete defeat, surrendering the nuclear program entirely, and having nothing to show for 40 years of investment and international isolation. Iran's regime has told its population for decades that nuclear program is sovereign right and symbol of national achievement. Shipping uranium out destroys that narrative and triggers internal backlash against regime for capitulation. So demand is reasonable for Israeli security, but impossible for Iranian regime politically. Second demand, zero enrichment capability. This goes beyond removing current stockpiles to dismantling the infrastructure that could create future stockpiles. All centrifuges at Natanz, Fordo, and other facilities must be destroyed or removed. All enrichment equipment must be eliminated. Iran keeps only research reactors for medical isotopes, but loses all capability to enrich uranium for any purpose. This guarantees Iran cannot reconstitute nuclear program after sanctions relief because they physically lack equipment to restart enrichment. But again, this is unacceptable to Iran because dismantling infrastructure means permanent surrender of nuclear capability, not temporary freeze. Iran wanted deals like JCPOA, where enrichment was limited but infrastructure preserved, allowing eventual breakout. Netanyahu demands infrastructure elimination, making breakout permanently impossible. Regime cannot accept this without appearing to surrender Iran's sovereign rights and technological achievements. Third demand, real limits on ballistic missiles. This is the demand Iran has already declared completely non-negotiable. Iran claims missiles are defensive capabilities that have nothing to do with nuclear program. But Netanyahu correctly identifies that missiles are the delivery systems for nuclear weapons. A bomb without delivery vehicle is military curiosity. A bomb with intercontinental ballistic missile is existential threat. So Netanyahu demands real limits on Iran's missile program, which likely means range restrictions preventing missiles from reaching Israel, quantity caps limiting total arsenal, and verification allowing inspections of missile facilities. But Iran has stated missiles will never be negotiated under any circumstances. Friday prayer leaders, senior commanders, Khamenei advisors all say missiles are red line. So Netanyahu's third demand is explicitly designed to conflict with Iran's publicly stated non-negotiable position, guaranteeing diplomatic failure. And fourth demand, tearing down Iran's regional axis of terror. Netanyahu uses phrase axis of terror to describe Iran's proxy network, including Hezbollah in Lebanon, with 150,000 rockets aimed at Israel, Hamas in Gaza that conducted October 7th attack, Houthis in Yemen attacking Red Sea shipping, and Iraqi militias attacking American bases. Netanyahu demands Iran completely defund these groups, cutting all financial support, weapons transfers, and operational guidance. This eliminates Iran's regional influence and ability to threaten Israel indirectly through proxies. But Iran views these relationships as strategic depth and deterrence against Israeli or American attack. Cutting proxies means surrendering Iran's regional power and leaving regime vulnerable to external pressure without asymmetric capabilities. So fourth demand, like the first three, is reasonable from Israeli security perspective, but unacceptable from Iranian regime survival perspective. And that's the genius of Netanyahu's four demands. They're designed to be simultaneously justifiable to international community as legitimate security requirements and impossible for Iran to accept without regime collapse. When talks fail, Netanyahu can tell world, we gave them reasonable path to peace. They refused. Now we must act to protect ourselves. And Trump has explicitly authorized exactly that action through his statement backing Israeli strikes on Iran's ballistic missile program. CBS News reported Trump told Netanyahu he would support Israeli strikes if negotiations fail. Support means Trump won't oppose Israeli operations, will provide intelligence and potentially military assistance, and will defend Israel diplomatically when international community criticizes strikes. And Trump's framing is perfect. Either Iran accepts the agreement meeting Netanyahu's four demands, or this will not end well for them. Not end well means comprehensive strikes destroying not just missiles, but nuclear facilities and regime infrastructure. Trump is giving Iran binary choice with both options leading to outcome he and Netanyahu desire. If Iran accepts four demands, regime collapses internally because population revolts against government that surrendered everything Iran sacrificed for. If Iran refuses four demands, Israeli strikes backed by American power, destroy regime's military capabilities, and potentially trigger collapse through demonstrating regime weakness. Trump and Netanyahu have created no-win scenario where Iran's regime is finished regardless of path chosen. And Trump's backing of Israeli strikes is significant because it eliminates the primary constraint that prevented Israeli action in past. Historically, Israel hesitated to strike Iran without American approval because of concerns about diplomatic isolation and lack of support. But Trump removing that constraint by explicitly authorizing Israeli operations means Netanyahu can order strikes confident of American backing. And the authorization is comprehensive. Trump supports strikes on ballistic missile program, which includes production facilities, storage bunkers, mobile launcher locations, and command centers. Destroying Iran's missile program requires hitting hundreds of targets across Iran over multiple days or weeks. That's sustained campaign, not surgical strike. And Trump's backing means American assets support those operations through intelligence, electronic warfare, air defense suppression, and potentially direct participation if Iran retaliates against American forces. But Iran is showing exactly the duplicitous behavior that makes military strikes necessary by pursuing diplomacy with one hand while flexing military muscle with other. Iran's Foreign Minister Araghchi met with UN nuclear chief Rafael Grossi ahead of second round of U.S. talks, appearing to pursue diplomatic solution. Meeting with IAEA Director General suggests Iran is serious about nuclear negotiations and willing to work with international monitors. But simultaneously, Iran's Revolutionary Guards launched military drills in Hormuz Strait, the strategic choke point through which 20% of global oil passes. IRGC Navy conducting exercises while diplomats prepare for talks is deliberate message that Iran maintains capability and willingness to disrupt shipping if attacked. And Araghchi's rhetoric during UN meeting reveals Iran's actual position. Araghchi vowed no submission before threats, meaning Iran will not surrender to American or Israeli pressure, regardless of military consequences. No submission is defiant posture, contradicting claims about being ready to compromise. And Deputy Iranian Foreign Minister simultaneously stated compromise on nuclear issue is possible if U.S. discusses sanctions relief, making Iranian flexibility conditional on American action first, while Iran takes no steps toward meeting Netanyahu's 4 demands. So Iran's position is, we'll meet with UN officials and claim flexibility to appear diplomatic, but we'll conduct military drills to show strength, vow no submission to preserve regime credibility domestically, and demand U.S. lift sanctions first before Iran makes any concessions. That's not diplomacy. That's game playing that Netanyahu warned Trump about, and that Trump's authorization of strikes is designed to punish. And U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio's statement that achieving deal will be very hard to do is diplomatic preparation for talks failing and military option becoming necessary. Rubio noted Trump would prefer diplomacy and negotiated settlement, which is accurate because any president prefers avoiding war if possible. But Rubio added very hard to do qualifier, signaling American expectations that Iran will not meet demands required for acceptable agreement. Very hard to do means nearly impossible given incompatible positions where Netanyahu demands complete uranium removal plus zero enrichment plus missile limits plus proxy defunding, while Iran says missiles non-negotiable and demands sanctions relief before making concessions. And U.S. officials repeatedly emphasize that Iran, not America, is holding up progress in negotiations. This is blame-shifting, preparing international community to accept that American diplomatic efforts were genuine, but Iranian intransigence made military action necessary. When strikes occur, Rubio and Trump will point to these statements showing America preferred deal, but Iran's refusal to be reasonable left no alternative to protecting Israeli and American security through force. So Rubio's very hard-to-do assessment isn't pessimism. It's strategic communication setting stage for justified military operations when Netanyahu's impossible demands predictably get refused by regime that cannot accept them without collapsing. And that regime is showing increasing signs of internal crisis that makes Netanyahu-Trump Masterplan timing perfect. Analysis describes Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei as being in twilight of tyranny, having grown increasingly repressive as he appears unable to organize his own succession. Khamenei is 85 years old, visibly declining health, and has not designated clear successor despite ruling since 1989. The succession crisis creates paralysis in strategic decision-making because different factions position for post-Khamenei power rather than unifying around coherent response to external pressure. When regime cannot organize succession, when supreme leader grows more repressive trying to maintain control, when internal factions compete rather than coordinate, that's government approaching collapse. And Netanyahu and Trump recognize this timing advantage. Striking Iran when regime is internally weak maximizes chances that external military pressure triggers internal revolution, completing regime overthrow. So Masterplan isn't just military strikes destroying capabilities. It strikes time to exploit succession crisis and internal weakness, combining external destruction with internal collapse to achieve comprehensive regime elimination. And 4 impossible demands create the justification while Trump's backing provides the capability and Khamenei's twilight provides the opportunity. Everything converges on regime finishing. But Iran is desperately trying to avoid this convergence by offering economic incentives, hoping to split Trump from Netanyahu or tempt American business interests. Iran says potential energy, mining, and aircraft deals on table in talks with U.S., pursuing nuclear agreement that delivers economic benefits for both sides, according to Iranian diplomat. This is Iran dangling billions in contracts for American companies if sanctions are lifted, access to Iranian oil fields, mining rights for Iranian resources, sales of American aircraft to Iranian airlines, jobs and profits for U.S. corporations. And Iran calculates that Trump, who positions as dealmaker prioritizing economic growth, might accept partial nuclear limitations in exchange for business opportunities while ignoring Netanyahu's 4 demands about missiles and proxies. But this calculation fails because Trump already coordinated with Netanyahu on impossible demand strategy and authorized strikes if demands aren't met. Trump's preference for deals doesn't mean accepting inadequate deals that leave Israeli cities vulnerable to Iranian missiles. So Iranian economic enticements get rejected because strategic necessity of eliminating threats outweighs temporary business benefits. And Trump can generate far more economic value by securing Iran's oil markets for Saudi Arabia and UAE after regime elimination than by legitimizing current regime through sanctions relief that funds continued threats. So Iran's energy and mining offers are strategic miscalculation, revealing regime doesn't understand Trump-Netanyahu coordination or refuses to accept that coordination is genuine. And Iran's hints at compromise are tactical theater designed to appear flexible while maintaining actual red lines. Deputy Foreign Minister says compromise on nuclear issue possible if U.S. discusses sanctions relief. Compromise sounds positive. Possible suggests openness. But notice what's missing. No mention of missiles. No mention of proxies. No mention of uranium removal or enrichment dismantlement. Iran's compromise is limited to nuclear program, and even that compromise is conditional on American sanctions relief first. So Iran wants U.S. to surrender leverage by lifting sanctions before Iran makes any verifiable concessions. And even if U.S. agreed to that sequencing, Iran's nuclear compromise wouldn't address Netanyahu's second, third, and fourth demands about enrichment infrastructure, missiles, and proxies. Iran is offering partial compliance on one of 4 demands in exchange for complete American concessions on sanctions. That's not compromise. That's demanding American surrender, while Iran keeps threatening capabilities. And Trump sees through this because Netanyahu warned him, "Don't let Iran play games or manipulate you." Trump listened. Trump demands complete Iranian capitulation across all 4 areas simultaneously with verification before any sanctions relief. Iran refuses, talks fail, and Trump-authorized strikes eliminate what diplomacy could not. The master plan is elegant in its simplicity. Netanyahu establishes 4 non-negotiable demands that are reasonable from security perspective, but impossible for Iranian regime to accept without collapsing. Trump backs Israeli strikes if demands aren't met, removing Israeli constraint and providing American support for sustained operations. Iran shows duplicitous behavior, pursuing diplomacy while conducting military drills and vowing no submission, proving untrustworthiness. Rubio declares deal very hard to do, preparing international community for talks failing. Khamenei's succession crisis and regime weakness create optimal timing for external pressure, triggering internal collapse. And Iran's fake compromise offerings get exposed as tactical games that don't address actual threat. Every element positions for inevitable outcome. Talks fail because demands are impossible. Trump-backed strikes as promised. Israeli operations destroy missiles and nuclear facilities. American sustained campaign eliminates regime infrastructure. Internal opposition rises when regime is crippled, and post-Ayatollah transition occurs. The 4 demands aren't genuine negotiating position. They're justification for military action both leaders already decided is necessary. Iran is trapped between accepting demands that collapse regime or refusing demands that trigger strikes collapsing regime. Both paths lead to elimination. That's the master plan. Netanyahu's demands, Trump's backing, Iran's duplicity. Rubio's preparation, timing exploiting weakness, and missiles targeted for destruction. The regime is finished because Trump and Netanyahu coordinated perfectly to create scenario where Iran cannot win regardless of choices made. 4 demands: strike authorization, duplicitous behavior proving untrustworthiness, and regime elimination, whether through impossible surrender or inevitable military operations. The master plan is activated. Iran's missiles are targeted. And regime finishing is matter of when, not if.